Welcome to the Maha Media Hub, and welcome to the Maha Revolution. I'm Tony Lyons, president of Maha Action. Today, I'd like to start with the undeniable fact that American kids are the sickest in the developed world. 1 in 5 children is obese. Childhood cancer is up 40% since 1975. 50% of children suffer from at least one chronic disease. And 70% of what they eat every day is ultra-processed food. These are not opinions, these are facts. And these things didn't happen by accident. The food was engineered to create cravings. The health system is rewarded for managing symptoms, not for removing causes. The people who benefit from keeping children sick also fund the agencies of government that are supposed to protect them. This is not a conspiracy theory. This is just how the business model works. And it's not your fault. The food was engineered to create addiction. The system was built to keep you as a customer, not to cure you. Once you understand that, you stop feeling guilty and start getting angry at the right people and the right things. We should be furious with the politicians who take money from big food, big pharma, big ag. They protect the system that made your children sick. We should also be furious at organizations that masquerade as protectors of public health, but are actually front groups for industries defending the profits of their donors rather than the American public. They too are responsible for our children's declining health. One such organization is the American Academy of Pediatrics, or the AAP. The AAP sued Secretary Kennedy in an attempt to stifle the democratic mandate given to him to radically transform the way we think about and manage public health. The AAP and other plaintiffs sued to stop Secretary Kennedy from keeping his promises to the American public and received a preliminary injunction against HHS and their changes to the vaccine schedule and to the changes in the ACIP members. As poll after poll shows, the old establishment is no longer trusted. Instead of working to regain that trust, the AAP and organizations like them have gone behind our backs to halt, to stifle, to stymie the scientific process, and to subvert the democratic process. So the question is, who are they fighting for? Who are they defending? Here's a screenshot of the AAP's own website thanking its donors, who between them manufacture almost all of the AAP recommended childhood vaccines. So the ruling that just came down puts a spotlight on the realities of corporate capture. While it's clear that the AAP is captured, and while some courts may be captured, like this one, I have every confidence that when this injunction is appealed to a higher court, the truth will prevail. And let me just clarify that at Maha, we don't draw any distinction between food or vaccines or pesticides. Anything that can impact human health must be held to the same standard, that we need transparent, gold standard science to guide every recommendation and every approval process. Science can't be dictated by captured interest, and it can't be shut down by the courts. So those who presided over the poisoning of our children are celebrating this injunction because they claim Secretary Kennedy is dangerous. And our answer is yes, Secretary Kennedy is dangerous. But he's a danger to the people and the companies who want to continue poisoning the American public. We all knew those companies would fight back, just like they fought back, just like the tobacco companies did, and just like the pesticide companies do, and the big food companies do. But Secretary Kennedy and President Trump have proven time after time that they're not afraid to stand up to the most powerful people on earth, to stand up to these gigantic corporations, to agency corruption that has led, this country to become the sickest people on earth. So Secretary Kennedy and President Trump have pledged to make Americans healthy once again. And while this is a short-term setback, the mission and the direction are clear. Maha has overcome huge challenges so far in this first long year. But we have such strong momentum behind us, and we will continue to overcome challenge after challenge to protect the American public and American children. Today, we have an incredible lineup of speakers who will be able to shed more light on the recent news and discuss children's health more generally. We'll be joined by pediatrician Dr. Bob Sears, scientist William Parker, Mary Holland from Children's Health Defense, CMS Administrator Dr. Mehmet Oz, HHS Senior Advisor Calley Means, and we'll also hear from Jan Jekielek from the Epoch Times, who will describe his new book, and then congressional candidate Brendan Herrera from Texas. But first, the former vice chairman of ACIP and one of the greatest minds in the subject of vaccinology, Dr. Robert Malone. He's a scientist, an inventor, a physician, and an author. Welcome, Dr. Malone.
Thanks a lot, Tony. I'm here in the studio of Aaron Seary, a friend to all MAHA, who is going to be working with me in broadcasting in the next couple of days, kind of a long analysis of all of this in his Informed podcast, dropping either Thursday or Friday, so watch for that. And I'd like to talk to you about protecting the people's health, not the health of pharma and the medical guilds. Friends, something happened this week that every American who cares about health freedom, transparency, and democratic accountability needs to know about. A single federal judge in Boston, a judge confirmed by a lame duck Democratic Senate in the final days before Republicans took control, a Boston judge who's a close ally of Chuck Schumer and Elizabeth Warren, who was barely confirmed by 47 to 45 votes, has single-handedly frozen the most significant effort to reform America's childhood vaccine schedule in a generation. One judge, appointed at the last possible minute by an outgoing political majority, has overruled the will of the American people. Because when you voted for this administration, you voted for exactly what Secretary Kennedy has been doing. You voted for fresh eyes on federal policy. You voted for transparency. You voted for someone willing to ask the questions that Washington has refused to ask for decades. And Secretary Kennedy delivered. After a careful review process under the specific direction and leadership of President Trump, his team, including Dr. Heidi Overton, MD, MPH, revised the childhood immunization schedule, aligning American recommendations more closely with what peer nations like Japan, Germany, and Denmark actually recommended for their children. He reconstituted the ACIP, the advisory committee that had gone for years without meaningful reform, bringing genuine intellectual diversity to a body that had grown too comfortable with its own conclusions. These are not radical acts. Every incoming administration reorganizes advisory infrastructure. This is how democratic governance works. But what you need to understand what ACIP actually is, because the court treats it like it was handed down from on high. The Advisory Committee on Immunization Practices has operated largely insulated from public scrutiny since 1964. Its recommendations carry enormous financial consequences, determining which vaccines insurers must cover, which vaccines Medicaid must provide, which vaccines the federal government purchases for children. We're talking about billions of dollars annually, flowing through a committee populated primarily by researchers drawn from institutions with deep financial relationships with the pharmaceutical industry. Secretary Kennedy's concern about conflict of interest was not fringe thinking. It is a long-standing critique raised by independent scientists and members of Congress from both parties. When he reconstituted ACIP, he was not abandoning science. He was opening a closed system to genuine scrutiny for the first time in decades. So what did the court do? In support of an American Academy of Pediatrics lawsuit, Judge Murphy froze the revised immunization schedule, froze the new ACIP appointments, and voided every vote those members have taken. One district court judge nullified the personnel decisions of a confirmed cabinet secretary and erased the policy work of a federal advisory committee, the HHS secretary, and the acting CDC director. And this is not Murphy's first time pushing past the boundaries of his authority. He previously blocked the administration's immigration enforcement actions. The Supreme Court stayed that order 6-3. Murphy declared his ruling was still in effect anyway. The Supreme Court rebuked him for a second time, 7-2. with even liberal justices joining the majority. Now, the same judge has turned his sights on your children's health policy. The administration has strong grounds for appeal. The Supreme Court ruled last year that federal courts cannot issue universal injunctions, orders binding the government's conduct beyond the parties of the lawsuit. Murphy dressed his order in different language, but the effect is identical. There's only one childhood vaccine schedule that's recommended by the CDC. Freezing it affects every child, every parent, and every state in the country. The question at the heart of this case is simple. Who decides public health policy in a democratic republic? An elected president and his Senate-confirmed cabinet secretary acting on a clear mandate from the American people? Or a committee of specialists protected by a politically appointed judge beyond the reach of the voters who bear the consequences? A district court order is a delay, not a defeat. The mandate you gave this administration has not expired. The work continues, and the American people, not the administrative state, not a Boston courtroom, will have the final word. Thank you for listening and for your support. Now, get to work. To make it clear that you support the decisions of the president, the secretary, and the acting CDC director, not the compromised self-dealing of the medical guild known as the American Academy of Pediatrics, its pharmaceutical industry sponsored, and a politically biased activist judge. Thanks for listening. Give them hell.
Thanks so much for all that you do, Robert. And I mean, I know that you're going to keep on fighting, that Secretary Kennedy is going to keep on fighting. And, this battle and all these battles that we've been fighting, they're just beginning. And it's a war. And these companies, we always knew that they were going to fight back, that they were going to try to cling to their profits instead of protecting people. And we're just not going to let them get away with it. So thanks again, and hopefully see you next week.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Next up, we have Brandon Herrera. He is a businessman, a MAHA backer, a social media personality, and he's running for Congress in Texas's 23rd district. He's pro-freedom. He's a very strong constitutionalist, and he believes that one of the keys to liberty is limiting federal power as much as possible, and that includes medical freedom. So, welcome to our show, and we wish you the best in your quest for this seat, and just very happy to have you here with us.
Well, first of all, thank you so much for the introduction. Thank you for having me. I'm looking forward to becoming MAHA's next big ally in the House of Representatives. So getting started, I think I'd like to tell you a little bit about my background. While my family's from Texas, at least 5 generations, the military service brought my family to Fort Bragg, North Carolina, where I spent the most of my childhood and growing up. It's where I started my businesses. I'm a firearm manufacturer. I've got a host of other businesses, now mostly in Texas. But that's where I kind of got my background. That's where I got my start in a lot of things. But it's also where I got to see firsthand just how bad medical tyranny can be. When COVID first kicked off in 2020, we had a very blue governor that did not believe in medical freedom by any means. And so we got to see the lockdown in full effect. We got to see vaccine mandates come down the pipe. And it was scary. And I was losing sight of the America that I thought I lived in. And so putting my money where my mouth is, I decided to return to my ancestral home of Texas and flee a place that I didn't feel like I was free to practice my rights. I feel like I had every right to be able to go in public without a mask, should I not wish to wear one, decide what goes into my own body. And so I returned to Texas. And so while in Texas, I thought I would be free from that sort of thing. And it was so much better. But that being said, we had a congressman who I have plenty of qualms about his voting record. It was the congressman that was representing me, Tony Gonzalez. Plenty of things about his gun rights, his votes against gun rights, his votes against the border. But one that stuck out as well was his vote for mandatory vaccine tracking. And so just a lot of things like that really perturbed me about my congressman. So I decided to step up and run against him. And last cycle, being outspent 10-1, I narrowly lost in a runoff by 407 votes. We came that close. And I was really hoping that he would become what we needed him to be. in that regard, to step up and become the more outspoken voice for freedom instead of the special interests. And that unfortunately did not happen. And so I made the second worst, or the single worst decision of my entire life, which was I decided to run for office again. And this time we put in everything that we had, and we narrowly defeated him, a sitting incumbent, a very well-funded sitting congressman. And so now, after he has bowed out of the race, effective about 2 weeks ago, I am now the candidate for Texas District 23 for the GOP. And we did it all without taking special interest money from the big DC groups, the big pharma, the pharmaceutical companies. We did it entirely independently, just usually small dollar donors and money that I was willing to put in. So we're very proud of that. And I think that gives us an edge where we're able to now accomplish the things that the district needs, that our people need, without having to worry about the special interests and what big pharma thinks about it and how my reelection is going to go. So I think it gives us a lot of freedom. I'm very excited to see how that plays out, because we've got a lot of things that we need to do. And I was very excited to see Secretary Kennedy be chosen for the slot. I think he represents a great voice in a lot of things that are bipartisan. Getting the poison out of our foods, getting American children active again, getting American adults active again. All of these things they're things that I think should be bipartisan. Everybody should be involved in. But unfortunately, that just hasn't been the case. So I'm appreciative to President Trump for making this such a big part of the platform. And I'm appreciative to everything that the MAHA movement's done so far. But we do have a lot of work left to do. And so I'm excited to be that voice in the House of Representatives, in Congress. I will be an outspoken voice for medical freedom. I will be an outspoken voice for getting poison out of our children's food and getting Americans healthy again. Because if we really want to worry about the cost of healthcare, the number one way to do it is to have healthier Americans. So I greatly appreciate you guys for having me on, and I'm looking forward to getting started. So you guys have been great to me. I've found great friends on your team, and I hope that you know that you have a friend in me as well.
Thanks, Brandon. It's great to have you on, and hope to stay in touch in the coming months and find ways to work together.
Yes, sir. The privilege is mine.
So, Brandon has been a really fierce champion of medical freedom as a birthright for everybody in this country, and as someone who's fought for the people who've worked for him during the crippling COVID lockdowns. He's shown that he won't hesitate to fight for freedom, to fight for people's medical freedom, for the restoration of informed consent. And, that's a big priority for him. And we really need candidates who are going to back the MAHA agenda. He's made it clear that he's going to do that there's an urgent need to fix our food, our school lunches, to restore transparency to science in this country so that we don't get corporate captured science. So we at MAHA are very proud to endorse him. And we feel that a vote for Brandon in Texas in District 23 is a vote for a true MAHA warrior. And that's what we need. That's what we want. And we're very happy to endorse him. Next up, we have Dr. Bob Sears. He's a pediatrician. He's the author of the vaccine book and many other books. He's a founding member of Physicians for Informed Consent. And with the ongoing threat of mandatory vaccination in this country, he's had a mission to ensure that all families throughout the country receive complete, objective, and undoctored informed consent before they make medical choices. So he wants people everywhere to retain the freedom to make healthcare decisions for themselves and for their children. And, MAHA doesn't want to force anyone to do anything. We want to make it easier and more affordable to be healthy. We want to provide access to information so that people can make decisions for themselves on, critical health choices. So happy to welcome Dr. Bob Sears.
Yeah, thanks, Tony. I really appreciate you having me on. I've spent my whole career talking about vaccines and informed consent and helping parents navigate this decision. And for many, many years, this was really just a decision that was in the doctor's office between doctors and parents. But as in recent years, since the pandemic, we all saw the vaccine issue go political. And when it came to vaccine mandates, 51% of our country has risen up and said no to mandates. We're not okay with mandates. And so the pandemic really opened people's eyes to the holds that the pharmaceutical companies have on our government and mainstream medicine, and how pharmaceutical companies really influence medical policy. And nowhere is that more true than in the vaccine arena. And so even though I'm not against vaccines in any way, I'm for freedom of decision making, informed consent, and I'm very much against mandates. And so that's kind of what I do. I spend my life talking about this, and I encourage everybody in the MAHA movement to stand up, keep talking about it. Now it's actually safe to talk about vaccines, right? It used to be taboo for so many years, but now you can have a conversation even with Democrats, right? I think everyone's open to at least to this conversation, most people. And I encourage people to not actually focus so much on data and numbers and statistics. Sometimes it's really just about creating relationships with people, with your friends and family, your coworkers. Let them get to know you. Let them get to know how healthy you are, how healthy your kids are. Let them understand you are a great, intelligent person and you've put a lot of thought into the vaccine decision. And then you get down into the numbers. Because that's partly why I'm here today. I'm here to talk about the Silver Booklet. It's a book put together by Physicians for Informed Consent. And it finally has all the data that people wish they had at their fingertips over all these years. You're having debates with people, you're talking to a doctor or a scientist, maybe you're talking to somebody who thinks vaccines are fantastic and they've saved us all from the dark ages. Well, when you actually look at the data, Tony, and you know this already, I know, but when you look at the data, the truth is vaccines aren't what saved us. It's healthy living, good nutrition, sanitation, healthier living is what has gotten us to get rid of all these diseases or get a lot of these diseases to very low numbers. And the Silver Booklet basically shows you all the data on diseases before vaccines came into play and what these diseases are now, how common or rare they are, and how, vaccines may or may not have played a role in reducing some of these diseases, but not most of these diseases. So if you're looking for a good data source and you want to be able to just flip open the page and instantly be able to quote great useful statistics on a disease. For example, you're having a measles debate with somebody and they tell you measles is super dangerous and it's killing everyone left and right. Well, you can open this book and say, well, no, actually measles only is fatal or very serious or dangerous in about 1 in every 93,000 children. It's rarely serious in healthy kids. If you want to talk polio, people are going to say, well, what if polio comes back? Well, the good thing about polio is most cases of polio are very mild and it only harms about 1 in every 190 children. 190,000 children are harmed by polio. It was very rare that children way back then were harmed. And of course, we've eliminated polio now. People might bring up whooping cough. Well, the good news about whooping cough is it's only harmful to about 1 in every 46,000 children. Every one of these diseases that people claim are deadly, and if they come back, it's going to harm us all. Fortunately, these are harmless infections in most cases. And so I encourage people to pick up this book. The data is there when you need it. Have these conversations with people because people are hungry to learn now more than ever.
Thanks so much, Bob. And the point for us is whether it's vaccines, drugs, pesticides, food, or really anything else, everything has to be on the table. We have to be able to talk about everything. We have to have informed consent. And we think that having these discussions, having this dialogue, this debate, that's real science. And that's what's going to lead to better health outcomes. So thanks so much for writing the book. Thanks for all the work that you've been doing and all the research. And we're just grateful to have you as a part of the MAHA movement.
Thanks, Tony.
Next up, we have William Parker, PhD. He got his PhD in chemistry in 1992, studied, biochemistry, microbiology, immunology at Duke for almost 30 years, and is now a visiting scholar at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, where my brother got his PhD. Bill spent over a decade studying the impact of acetaminophen combined with oxidative stress on neurodevelopment. And he's published more than 150 peer-reviewed papers, many on the role of acetaminophen in the introduction and the outcome of autism. So thanks so much, William, for coming on, and thanks for the work that you've done.
Thank you very much, Tony. It's a pleasure to be here. I didn't just want to take 5 minutes and talk to you a little bit about, I see you've got a copy of that book that's right beside you there, dealing with the connection between acetaminophen, also known as Tylenol, and autism spectrum disorder. So there are dozens of independent lines of evidence that have led our group to conclude, and our group has toxicologists, pharmacologists in it, to conclude that exposure of susceptible babies and children to acetaminophen causes many, if not most, cases of autism spectrum disorder. It's also highly likely that it causes the vast majority of cases of autism spectrum disorder. And I want to emphasize here that susceptibility is a big issue. So there's a lot of things, genetics, epigenetics, and a tremendous number of toxins that we have put in our environment that cause susceptibility. So we have 9 lines of evidence from the fields of toxicology and pharmacology, that's not counting over a dozen studies in laboratory animals, that are telling us that, yeah, this is a real connection here, this connection between acetaminophen and autism spectrum disorder. So for example, most people in the field of toxicology know that anybody who takes acetaminophen is their body's going to convert a little bit of that into a very, very toxic metabolite, whether it's a baby, a child, or an adult. You get that toxic metabolite, and it just is lethal to some of the cells in your body, but most people can handle it. Now, the problem is that children with autism have deficiencies in all 3 of the major pathways that detoxify or deal with acetaminophen without causing big problems. So this has been known since the 1980s, and then a lot of more recent data has confirmed this. This is something that the American Association of Pediatrics does not seem to want to grasp. And if you get that book, you'll see that I copy a lot of correspondence between me and the association. It's in that book, and there's people with no formal scientific training whatsoever that understand the metabolism of acetaminophen much better than the gatekeepers at the American Association of Pediatrics. So it's an unreal situation. Now, our evidence, the scientific evidence, includes 14 different associations in place, time, or medical practice. And these are independent associations. So there's so much evidence out there. There's 12 additional lines of evidence that I haven't even mentioned. So, for example, if you compare fetal alcohol spectrum disorder with autism spectrum disorder, what you will see is that they're both very common, and they share a lot of features in common, many features in common, including the fact that alcohol and acetaminophen, they're both drugs that treat fevers and pain, and both alcohol and acetaminophen are metabolized by exactly the same enzyme into a toxic metabolite. I mean, it's amazing. And so, of course, the drug was never proven safe for brain development before it was given to babies, but if you're a pharmacologist, that's not surprising, because almost nothing was ever tested for safety for brain development before it was put in babies. But it was finally tested in 2014. It was Henrik Weiberg, put acetaminophen into a very, very young laboratory animal, and the drug failed miserably, even at low doses, lower than what we give to humans. It caused tremendous amount of long-term brain damage in those laboratory animals, which means it could never be approved by the FDA today. So that brings us, we've got all the dozens of lines of evidence. And then President Trump in September of last year made an announcement. He said, hey, this drug is not safe. And Secretary Kennedy obviously had a lot to do with that. And then what happened is kind of surprising. So if we could pull up that data slide. So what happened was now that 30 different research groups have published 30 different papers saying that President Trump was wrong. And here's the weird thing. They're only focused on one line of evidence. And this line of evidence, and you can see it here in this data slide, it has to do with the associations between acetaminophen use in pregnancy and autism spectrum disorder. So if you look at the white spots there, those are the spots from the we'll call it the super data from Sweden. That's what, because everybody's looking at the same data. And if you look at the left, you on the left-hand side of that data, you can see it's almost at the 2.0 level. So which means that there's almost twice a chance of having a child with autism if you use a lot of acetaminophen during pregnancy. But as you move to the right, you cancel that out because you cancel out susceptibility. So if you look at the blue squares, that looks like sort of the same data, but it's not the same data. That's a computer simulation that shows what would happen if acetaminophen plus susceptibility causes autism, and you run the same calculations and cancel out susceptibility. So basically what that study shows is that you get exactly what we would expect you to get if acetaminophen is involved in the induction of autism. So you're basically looking at sort of this ocean of incompetence with a kind of a fog of sort of scientific mumbo jumbo and jargon that's covering it up. I mean, it's time to stop this nonsense. In the 5 minutes it took me to explain this, one more American child on average will now have to deal with acetaminophen-induced autism spectrum disorder. So in closing here, just be careful about labor and delivery, because right when you're born is the most dangerous time. Regression into autism is dangerous, and watch out for heavy use during pregnancy. We don't have data on just occasional use. And thank you. Thank you very much for your time.
Thanks so much for coming on, Dr. Parker. And, thanks for all the work that you've done to make children safer. And once again, I just want to keep on saying this, everything has to be on the table. For MAHA, everything is on the table. There's been a generation of censorship and propaganda and lies, and we need transparent science. We need open dialogue and debate, and that's what we're getting now, finally. So thanks again for coming on.
Thank you very much, Tony. It's a pleasure to be here.
Next up, we have Dr. Eric Berg. He's known as the Knowledge Doctor, and he's earned that title for being a globally recognized health teacher with over 40 million followers on all platforms, and 3 decades of helping people comprehend how the body works and coming up with practical strategies to improve their health. So he's been such an incredible fighter for public health, an advocate for common sense, and for making it easier to be healthy. So thanks for all the work you do, Eric, and thanks for coming on again.
Thank you so much, Tony. I really appreciate it. Today, I'm going to talk about an interesting story, a study that was done in July 2025 by the Journal of American Medical Association. They released the largest study ever done on American children's health. So they tracked over 2 million kids across 172 health indicators for 17 years. And the conclusion, which is not going to be surprising, was there's a fundamental decline in the nation's health of our children. But it wasn't just 1 or 2 issues. It was nearly every single metric was trending downward in these kids. So right now, nearly 1 in 2 kids who walks in a pediatric clinic has at least one chronic condition. Chronic condition for a kid: asthma, obesity, autoimmune disorders, behavioral issues. Like, this has become the new normal. Even outside clinics, the general rate has jumped from 1 to 4 to 1 in 3. So a child born in the US today has literally 2 times as likely to die before the age of 20 compared to other kids in Germany, Japan, despite America spending more in healthcare, I think it's 4.9 trillion, which is more than any other country on earth. So This is not just a physical thing also, it's also teen depression has exploded in the last 15 years. Early puberty in children went up 60%. Loneliness is a really a common thing right now with kids, which is completely different when I was growing up. 2024, the National Academy of Sciences confirmed that the U.S. ranked the last among wealthiest nation in child well-being, dead last. Yet we spend the most. So obviously, we're spending on the wrong things. But here's where it really gets disturbing. 70% of what the average American eats is ultra-processed food, if you want to even call it that. So this junk food is completely engineered in labs, primarily for addiction, profit, shelf life, and dependency. So in one study, they tracked over 58,000 children and found just a slight increase in junk food drove up 25% rise in ADHD symptoms. Another study from kids that were 3 years old up to teenage years showed early consumption of ultra-processed foods predicted inattention and hyperactivity years later, because it inflames the gut, keeps your blood sugars chronically high, and it hijacks a child's mood, so they're not themselves. So we're literally building bodies out of the cheapest, worst raw material that ever existed. And I don't even know, again, why we call it food. But, manufacturers spend millions on designing these foods for addiction. They have scientists that look at mouthfeel and taste, and even like in the flavor chemicals, there's over like 100 different chemicals to explode in our brains. Never before in history have we had that. So it's all about engineering for pleasure and addiction and dependency. And so when the body gets addicted, willpower doesn't work anymore. Discipline does not work anymore. It's going to override the body. So it's a real trap, not just for kids, it's for adults as well. And the very companies that are behind this get rewarded with taxpayers' subsidies, right? So we, the taxpayers, literally prepay for this industrial sludge, starch, sugar, and seed oils that make our kids sick. So this is actually what MAHA is about. We're not going to wait for permission. We're here to tell you what happened and help families take their health back, because this is not just a food issue. It's not just about healthcare. It's about our kids. So at the very least, we should not be funding chronic illness to our children. Thanks, Tony.
Thanks so much, Eric. And, thanks for all the work that you're doing. And I'm one of the people who sees that more closely probably than anybody watching. But I know that you're just dedicated to solving these problems, and that you're working on it day and night. And it's just so important to the world, to the MAHA movement, to mothers, to children. So keep up the great work. And then thanks for all the help that you've given to us.
Thank you.
Next up, we have Mary Holland, and she runs the incredible nonprofit Children's Health Defense. She's a prolific author and a former professor at NYU. She's been fighting to protect children's health for well over 2 decades. And, Children's Health Defense now is suing the AAP in a separate case, but has filed a friend of the court brief to help with this, more recent case and the injunction that has come down. So thanks so much, Mary. Great to have you on.
Thanks for being here, Tony. So I understand that Robert Malone already talked a little bit about the American Academy of Pediatrics case against Secretary Kennedy and Judge Murphy, who stayed basically everything that Bobby Kennedy and ACIP and CDC are doing in the vaccine realm, which is breathtaking. We tried to intervene in that case. We weren't permitted to intervene, but we did put in a friend of the court brief. And we said, the American Academy of Pediatrics represents pediatricians. It's representing doctors. The harm to the doctors, arguably, is revenue harm and convenience harm. They are slightly inconvenienced by this normal policy change. This was not a radical change by Kennedy. They were reasonable reforms that needed to happen. We tried to intervene and did put in a friend of the court because we care about the kids and we care about the kids' health. And in our case against the American Academy of Pediatrics, the two leading plaintiffs are mothers of children who died as young children from the AAP recommended vaccine schedule. And there's no question that these kids died from the vaccines. In one case, the child died in the hospital. In the other case, doctors in a hospital had said this is likely vaccine injury. It's not really disputable. So our case, we submitted that. Unfortunately, Judge Murphy didn't really look at that. Aside from having been really written a partisan decision, and he was a very late Biden appointee. He's a newbie judge. He was just appointed in 2024. So I think it's just really a bad decision, and our very strong hope is that the First Circuit Court of Appeals is going to favorably let us intervene and is going to overturn his decision. But I want to speak briefly about our case, Children's Health Defense, and these moms, Mrs. Shaw and Ms. Nelson, and two pediatricians who were essentially exiled from pediatrics and lost their license because of the trade association guild behavior of the AAP. They kick out people who won't follow their pharma model. Sadly, pediatrics has become completely embedded with the pharmaceutical industry and having the bedrock of the practice be around so-called well baby visits that are really vaccination opportunities. The AAP has been lying to the American public knowingly for a very long time. In 2003, 2011, the Institute of Medicine put out reports that said, we don't really know the safety of the childhood vaccine schedule. It's never been properly tested in a prospective vax versus unvaxxed trial. And so you can't say that it's safe and effective, but the AAP has been telling parents for decades that the schedule is well tested, it's safe and effective, there's no problem vaccinating a slightly sick child, no problem giving lots of shots altogether. And that's simply not true. And in our case against the AAP, we point out that in the military, after the Gulf War syndrome was connected to the anthrax shots, even in the military, they will not give more than 5 vaccines at once. These are 18-year-olds or older who are absolutely in robust health, but they won't give them with developed immune systems more than 5 shots. And yet we're giving babies 10 shots at once is not at all uncommon. So the only silver lining of this AAP challenge and Judge Murphy's decision is that it's drawing national attention to the question of the childhood vaccine program and whether or not parents deserve an absolute right to make decisions on their own. Several states, including our own New York, has no religious exemption, de facto has no medical exemptions. This is outrageous given what we know about vaccination and childhood health. So we're here to keep fighting. Bless MAHA for trying to achieve true health for all Americans. Thanks, Tony.
Thanks, Marion. Thanks for all of the work that you've done for so many years, and all the cases. I have no idea how many cases you have worked on, but Bobby worked on something like 400 cases, and I'm sure you're getting close. So thanks for being just a tireless fighter for children's health.
Thanks, Tony.
Next up, we have Dr. Oz. He is, he's the head of CMS, and he is in charge of health coverage for over 160 million people in this country. And he's been working around the clock, just tooth and nail, to shift the focus from treatment to prevention and from drugs to nutrition, and to make it easier and more affordable to be healthy in this country. And really nothing could be more important than that. So thanks so much for all the work you're doing.
Thanks very much, Tony. So I want to take a step back and challenge everybody to help with a problem that we're facing, which is that when you give people services that benefit them, but the benefit is less than having a heart surgery, for example, if done appropriately, and the people doing it aren't licensed, how do you actually make sure that the right people got the right stuff at the right time? This is one of the battles that's been going on in government for a long time. Why don't we give food to people who would benefit from it? Because although you can demonstrate that there is a benefit to giving food, the benefit is not as much, again, as fixing a hernia or opening a blocked artery. So if over time, you end up recognizing that you've got a 20% improvement, which is a big improvement for just food. And again, food is impactful at many levels. It's the original medication was to give people better food. And some of our foods were medications like honey, which is probably the oldest medicine of all. Why does honey work? Because it's high in sugar. Your cells don't die, but the bacteria do because they hate sugar. And so these are the kinds of observations that doctors had in the days of yore. But today, modern day America, if I give you food and I have a 20% improvement, but 40% of the food given out is fraudulently given to people who don't need it, now the benefit to society becomes more suspect. We're witnessing this a lot in the media now as we talk about fraud impacting on populations who are most vulnerable. So to do preventive services, and these are kind of things that Secretary Kennedy and all of you are passionate about, we've got to make sure that we got solid data demonstrating their benefit, and then we got to give them to the right people at the right time, at the right price, and not let fraudsters get in there. And I'm just going to put it out there, a lot of these fraudsters are foreigners. Foreign governments in particular are involved in this process, granting asylum to people stealing stuff. And it's not just for the kinds of things that we're normally talking about, food and the like, but they're doing it in many other areas. And because it's becoming so profitable and so obvious you can steal from the government, they're destroying the kinds of softer services that really do have value, but they're just not as easy to police. And I'll give you a concrete example. I mentioned heart surgery and hernias as two prototypical examples of traditional services you would pay for. There's a licensed clinician, a nurse that's got a history of doing her job, a hospital that also has been reviewed, and a whole slew of anesthesiologists, a lot of people involved, plus you have a scar at the end. So that's pretty clearly a procedure that's happening, it's paid for, there's a whole system built around it. Now let's say we talk about food that you might give to that patient after they get home to make sure they eat correctly so they don't have to go back to the hospital. You cut back on the kielbasas, which have a lot of salt in them that would put them back into heart failure. You're careful about the amount of sugar and fat and food pyramids that we talked about in past weeks. That's all understood and adjudicated, and the foods are given in the right way. I would do that if I was going home for one of those procedures. I give it to my family members. But many of the rules right now are designed to help you if your family can't do it. And that's one of the side effects of the atomization of the American people. We sort of go our own way, and sometimes where our family structure suffers because of that. And so when we try to replace what your mother would make for you or your daughter would craft for you with a business, then the person doing it doesn't always have the same incentives as your family might actually have. And so I want us all to think about that a little bit because we can get on here and go, rah, 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 why doesn't the government do certain things? This is a challenge we're all running into. It's holding us back from using food in the ways that ideally we would have desired to use it as medicine because there's been so much of battle over its appropriate use. We need better models, better ideas, better technology to follow when it's done correctly. And it's also valuable to be able to do studies that show an even bigger benefit when using it correctly. So you target its use more appropriately. I just made a video for a big walking challenge that I've got to all the governors as a good example. Walking about 20 minutes a day, if everyone would do it, 20 minutes more a day, would generate about $100 billion in savings to Medicare a year. It's massive. Just avoiding being purely sedentary. And so that's that we don't have to pay a lot of money to get people to walk. But if I had to get you to walk, I would actually pay money to do it. So beneficial. But how much should we pay for that? And how do we know that the people that are doing it are appropriate for doing it and are credentialed? And we're seeing this now and again in a lot of other areas like autism care and elder care and the like. So this topic will come up again and again. And I think the MAHA movement, which is again making it easier to be healthy in America, should deal with these side issues that hinder us from achieving that goal. Tony, thanks for hosting these events and having me on.
Yeah, thanks a lot. And it's such a great point that food can be medicine, that you have mentioned cherry juice or honey or so many other things, and then walking 20 minutes each day. There's so many ways that we can do things better, and spending more money clearly isn't one of them, because we have already spent 2.5 times what any country on the planet spends per capita, and we get worse health outcomes. So we need to turn that around, and spending less and being smarter is probably the answer. Thanks for coming on. Next up, we have Calley Means. He is the senior advisor to the Office of the Secretary at HHS. He's the co-author of Good Energy, which has been a really unexpected and runaway bestseller that he wrote with his sister, Casey Means. He's been working to address the root causes of disease, focused on healthy food, exercise, sleep, stress management. So just doing a spectacular job, being a tireless fighter, and we're so grateful for all the work that he's doing for the MAHA movement. Thanks for coming on again.
Thanks, Tony. And those were incredible comments from Dr. Oz. I think it takes you behind the scenes of issues that I see every day the government's grappling with that they've never talked about before. He makes a great point. We're having conversations about how to think about medicine in a different way that clearly have never happened in the government before. Dr. Oz, Secretary Kennedy are talking every day to Brooke Rollins at the USDA. They're talking throughout the government about how to make food more of a part of our healthcare system. But as he just said, as we're going through the healthcare system, any program that started causes massive fraud and massive waste and abuse. And there's discussions on how to make sure we're doing this in the correct way and a ton of trade-offs. And I just think that was a great example of I think what's been incredible in the first year of MAHA. There's been historic successes, and I think we have more successful policy victories on the issues we care about than at any time in American history. But I think even more important, potentially, we're creating a culture in the government where we're grappling with these long-term issues. And I wanted to take everyone, I wanted to describe a meeting I had this morning that maybe shed some light on the type of issues we're grappling with. I met with, around the table with about 20 farmers from around the country. And these are all very good, dedicated people. And, they're struggling in a lot of ways. They came to the White House to talk about what farmers are facing. And I started by asking them what they think of the MAHA movement, what comes to mind when they hear the word MAHA. And the farmers said some positive things, but they hit on the theme that they feel attacked. They feel that Americans don't understand what they're doing. They feel under threat. And my response was that was tragic, because what's happening in the country, to me, one of the beating hearts of it is that we have to respect farmers more, that we have to have more awe and curiosity about our food, about how what we're eating impacts the complicated dynamics in our body and fuels health, and how we have to celebrate as a culture what's on our fork more than interventions like drugs and procedures after we get sick. And we need to grapple with this fact that we've lost our way, where we're spending 3 to 4 times more on healthcare than any country in the world, but interestingly spend much less on food and respect food less than most other developed countries. That's what we're trying to grapple with, which is at the end of the day a vision where farmers are held in much higher regard. So why are they feeling attacked? And I'll just walk you through what they said, and it gets into the pesticide discussion, which I know has caused a lot of emotion, and rightfully so. They said that they are facing threats on every front. They are facing higher costs, their uncertain markets, weather issues, and most farmers are not even making money. And they explained that they are playing by the rules in their mind, that they are playing by the rules that have been set. The reality is, with the current system we have, 97% of corn, which they were growing, is sprayed with synthetic pesticides. And that they feel like there's a lot of energy that doesn't quite understand what they're doing, and really gives them no options. Because if glyphosate was removed from the market tomorrow, they wouldn't have anything else to use. Particularly, they would be forced to use things that are less safe. And it's just interesting, and what Secretary Kennedy's doing throughout the government is we are engaging in these complex conversations. I just think that was important to share that this issue is complex. And in those conversations, and what we ended it was talking about how we have to realize what's being faced on the ground with the rules that farmers have followed that have been set. But they also fully agree that we would be massively in a failure scenario if we do not have in the next 5 to 10 years a massively changed world, a world with safer farming practices, more regenerative practices, an explosion in innovation, both in practices and in tools that they're using. And they agree with that too. And those are the type of conversations that are happening. And I think it really feels this way. These issues are being grappled with in a way that's never been grappled with by the federal government. This is not a plea to be more incremental or an excuse in any way, but I do think when you look at the first year of MAHA, we have gotten so much done. We have achieved successes that we would not have dreamed of 2 years ago around questioning our medical system, removing corporate capture, flipping the food pyramid, steering hundreds of billions of dollars, which we're doing more to real food instead of ultra-processed food, calling out ultra-processed food for the first time. The MAHA movement has caused massive conversations and massive grappling with chronic disease in every boardroom of every major company in America. I can say that definitively. And there is a mass conversation happening about how to correct these issues with chronic disease. I will say, and again, this is not to be making an excuse, but I think it is just the truth. What we're opening up are long-term issues that get to the foundational structures of the U.S. healthcare system, the U.S. agriculture system, and this is a long-term battle. We have a lot more to do. And we're going to get a lot done in the next year. My ask for everyone on this call is we're going to have a lot more announcements from Dr. Oz, from Secretary Kennedy, from Marty McCary, and we are going to have Secretary Kennedy absolutely on the hunt and on the trail around the country, both to continue telling the truth, to continue talking about what we've achieved, to continue talking about what we're going to achieve. We're going to be all over the country, and we'd love to see many of you guys there. This movement has achieved a lot. There's a lot more to achieve, and major foundational issues are being grappled with. And I will say, when it comes to farmers, these are complex issues. Again, that's not excusing any issue. The rules have been rigged and set for many industries, and there are good people in those industries. And everyone agrees with the 10-year vision that we have, which is a world where we're celebrating farmers more, and the medical system is much more geared towards preventing and asking why people are getting sick instead of drugging them and cutting them open after they get sick. This is a movement worth continuing, worth supporting. We're working every single day to earn that trust. And I know Secretary Kennedy is going to be out there in force, telling the truth, and continuing driving progress. So thank you to everyone on the call, and we'll continue to push.
Thanks, Calley. That was really great. And, it's just so clearly true that there have been so many wins in the last year, so many historic wins. And, we need to keep fighting on all these different fronts, but also celebrate that we've made lots of really important progress. And when it comes to farmers, I think that we have to recognize that we need to partner with farmers, that we need to find ways to make it easier and more affordable for them to produce healthy food for us. And we need to help them find ways to make money, help them off-ramp dangerous chemicals, dangerous pesticides in ways that are profitable and that are common sense and that will work for them, because then it will work for all of us. So thanks so much for the work you're doing.
Thank you.
Next up, we have Jan Jekielek, and he is a senior editor with Epoch Times, host of the show American thought leaders and a prominent documentary filmmaker. His career has spanned academia, human rights work, and now for almost 2 decades, media. His most recent book is called Kill to Order, and it explores the incredible, just the grave human rights abuses that are going on in China now through the Chinese Communist Party and through forced organ harvesting. So let's welcome him and hear that just horrible story. Thanks for coming on.
Tony, thank you so much. And here's the thing, okay? I realized during COVID that we had entered here in the West, here in America, into a weird utilitarian mentality around medicine. There's been this kind of rise of a concept called utilitarian bioethics, and that's the medicine of the greatest good for the greatest number. In other words, it's okay to sacrifice a few. Some of you will be familiar with this. It's okay to sacrifice a few if the whole manages to function well. So, and in communist societies, right, this, by the way, this is in contrast to Hippocratic medicine, right, where a medical practitioner tries to do the absolute best for the individual person and tries to provide them with the least amount of harm with any intervention that they make one-on-one, right? And medicine is this emergent property. So what we saw under COVID especially was this approach where it really is kind of easy to make that decision. Basically, we're gonna, for example, right, children never needed to be treated for COVID and so forth with, but instead they were, because it was for the greater good of the whole population. They wanted to see kind of the uptake of the COVID products, right, in response to trying to solve the pandemic. So in communist China, we see kind of the apotheosis, the extreme version of this utilitarian bioethics model. The problem with utilitarian bioethics is it's basically someone gets to decide what that greatest good is. And in communist societies, that greatest good is the survival and supremacy of the Communist Party. So you get this kind of kill to order industry. And what this kill to order industry is a situation where prisoners of conscience, it was built on the backs of Falun Gong practitioners, people who practice truthfulness, compassion, forbearance, actually to be true, good, and endure is another translation that I was just reminded of recently of these principles. People who don't drink, don't smoke, basically have a kind of unusually high levels of health as a result, and health benefits from the practice itself, okay, grew massively to 70 to 100 million people doing it in the 90s in China. And this very evil system that instrumentalizes everything basically turned against them, dehumanized them with propaganda, put millions of them into their massive incarceration system, and then started blood typing, tissue typing, and organ scanning them. Okay, and basically people here in the West, in Taiwan, in South Korea, and of course a lot in China, very affluent people could suddenly get organs scheduled, like a heart transplant scheduled in 2 weeks. Okay, and that's just shocking and impossible in a normal system, because what happens in a normal system is someone has to have a catastrophic accident and they have to match with all these, blood type, tissue type, size, and so forth. But in China, you can get it in 2 weeks because these people are basically in this incarceration system, innocent people, prisoners of conscience, okay, unusually healthy prisoners of conscience who can then be basically pre-matched and killed to order when that transaction goes through, when the wealthy person, pays the money. So I think there's a huge lesson to be learned from this, right? That we've been kind of drifting here in America from this Hippocratic model of medicine towards this more utilitarian model. There's even been op-eds in the New York Times about this, about reducing the strictness of the dead donor rule. We've had to, HHS has had to decertify multiple transplant systems in America because of their own systemic violations, okay? And this is partially because of our complicity with the system, working hand in hand, funding, all sorts of, we even train some of the surgeons over there where this is kind of the dominant system. This book goes into all of that, into understanding how this particular state is the extreme of utilitarian bioethics and how we can try to avoid that in our own case, and how to actually, engage that regime, not isolate ourselves, but in a way where we understand what they're about and how they really instrumentalize everything, including human beings and human bodies. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Jan. Thanks for Thanks for coming on. Thanks for doing all of the work for that book. I mean, it's a real cautionary tale for what can happen. And so when we look at our own country and we see that in some sense, people are being killed to order by toxins, they're being sickened to order, and that's what we're fighting. And, when you look at things like glyphosate, just to make it clear, we're never going to stop fighting to get that out of our food, out of our water, and really to get it permanently out. And the point here is that we have to face that some of these battles, even though we're doing much better than people are doing in China, people have been fighting for 40 years to win these kinds of battles. And I think we have the opportunity right now. It's only been 1 year, but we have the opportunity to actually win this battle with a logical, common sense strategy to get it out and to off ramp it and to bring on alternatives. So thanks a lot for the research you did and for the story and for what that story can tell all of us.
Thank you.
Thanks. Next up, we have Gary Brecka, who is the visionary founder of The Ultimate Human. And he's been really fighting, just to say it once again, to make sure that we're not killed to order by the toxins in our food, by toxins in all kinds of things, whether it's pesticides or drugs or anything. So he's really on the front lines, every day putting out messaging to 40 to 45 million people and telling them ways that they can be healthier, that they can work to combat all of what's been, all of what we've been subjected to over the last generation. So I'm so grateful, Gary, for all the work that you've done, and can't wait to hear what you have to say today.
Yeah, thank you so much. Actually, Dr. Berg stole a lot of my thunder. So congratulations, Dr. Berg. He hit on the same points that I wanted to cover today. I don't talk a lot about my previous career as a mortality researcher, but I think it's appropriate for this stage of the conversation with Maha, because when mortality scientists are placing you on an actuarial curve and trying to determine your specific mortality, they're going to look at a number of things. If, let's say that you're applying for an annuity or a large life insurance policy or a reverse mortgage or any number of the billions of dollars of financial services instruments that are based on mortality, how many more months do you have left on Earth? They're going to look at a few things. They're going to look at a standard panel of blood work. They're going to look at some demographic data. But most importantly, what they're going to assess is a category called modifiable risk factors. And modifiable risk factors in our model for mortality, which was called a probabilistic model that was attempting to predict how many more months somebody had left on Earth, modifiable risk factors were dietary and lifestyle changes. They were changes to someone's demographic data that they were in control of. And essentially what we would do is we would place you on a standard actuarial curve, and then we'd move you to the left, dying early, or we'd move you to the right, dying later, based on the percentage chance, the statistical incidence that you would modify one of these risk factors. And the probability in the vast majority of Americans was so low, it was so near zero, that it became something that we actually withdrew from the model. And what I mean by that was, when we look at the pandemic of chronic disease, and you heard Bobby Kennedy say that 85% of chronic disease is preventable, it absolutely is. When 70% of our children's diets consist of ultra-processed foods, this should be a 9-alarm fire, hair on fire, call all your friends, pound the phones for every congressman. How do we address this pandemic of processed foods in our children's diet? One of the largest obesity studies, meta-analyses on obesity studies ever conducted, concluded, if I was to sort of summarize it, that so goes the child, so goes the adult. And what they concluded was a prepubescent child that emerges from puberty in an obese state with these markers for cardiovascular risk, which most of these obese children, more than 50% of them, have cardiovascular risk markers like hypertension. If this child goes through puberty and emerges from puberty as an obese child, there is a 10 times more likelihood that they will remain obese throughout the entirety of their adult lifetime. And so the intervention has to happen early. It has to happen in our most vulnerable. It has to happen in children, and mainly ages 6 to 13, when they're going through these puberty stages, when they are the most susceptible to these processed foods, and when they're consuming the largest amount of processed foods. And if you look at the global obesity rise, like some of the statistical and global obesity rise from 1975 to 2016, the vast majority of this rise occurred between 2000 and 2016, when rates increased tenfold for girls and for boys. And then what happened was those children that started to eat an increasingly highly processed diet became increasingly obese adults. And now that enters the medical system. And now we have this pandemic of chronic disease, of which 85% is treatable. But because we didn't get to the root and get a hold of these children early, we suffered the consequences, not just in those children and their families, but in the amount of money that American taxpayers spend on healthcare. So I had a lot more data and statistics that I wanted to read, but I just wanted to emphasize that, that in our mortality science data, modifiable risk factors were the one area where people actually, if they would make a change, on average, it would have added 7 years, not just to their lifespan, but to their health span. And I want to just make a quick closing final comment about Casey Means. And, she's still being held up in the Senate. I think that Casey started too early identifying how incentives in our system are actually driving this system to produce sick patients. And you have the cabal of forces that are for the status quo that are trying to keep her confirmation from proceeding. So it's being held up by Susan Collins and Lisa Murkowski. And if you're in those districts, or even if you have a telephone and can reach out to them, let them know how important it is for us to have a Surgeon General that really cares about the American taxpayer. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks so much, Gary. And it's just a great point that, 85% of chronic disease can be prevented. And it's just, it's just so clear that we can do better. We can protect our children. We can have an end to chronic disease in this country as a national problem. And we can do that by just doing a better job in a whole bunch of different segments, different areas. And we can get to the root causes, and we can stop kind of hacking at the branches of them and really get to the root cause. And thank you for all the work you're doing to help us get to those root causes. And, we are going to do it. We as a movement are going to get this done. And I really believe we can do it. We're 1 year in, we've got 3 left. Let's all work together. So thanks again.
You're welcome, Tony.
Yeah.
So thanks to all of you for joining us for yet another Maha Media Hub, and for coming in each week and joining us. And thanks to all the speakers for their insights, their dedication, their contributions. We all have different things that we focus on, but we share the belief, once again, that we can end chronic disease. And we have powerful tools at our fingertips. I'm going to say this each time. We have the Maha report on Substack with almost 200,000 subscribers. We have the Maha Institute and their roundtables that are really just getting to be fantastic. We've got the historic Maha Summit once a year in November. We've got the legislative tracker. We've got Jeff Hayes' incredible Maha films. We have Maha books, Maha parties, big events all around the country. We've got the Maha Warriors mailing list that's now about 2 million, and we're hoping to get that to 10 million by year end. And then we've got the thousands and thousands of influencers like all of you who are watching this, and your hundreds of millions of followers, because we all share this value, this belief that we can protect our children. So we're going to harness all of that power, every bit of it, to work with every cabinet member, every branch of government, everyone who will help us support and be a powerful resource to children, but a powerful resource to this Trump administration going into the midterms, because we know that we have to win the midterms to complete this journey, this mission that Secretary Kennedy launched with MAHA. And we know that Americans overwhelmingly want the administration to fight to make America healthy. And that, that's going to take a lot of work. There are a lot of competing interests. There are lobbyists, there are corporations of, all kinds who are fighting, who are nipping us and trying to thwart any kind of progress we can make. So it's going to be a tough battle. This is a street fight. And if we're going to win this, we have to stick together. We have to recognize that there are going to be setbacks and then come at it in a different way. So, following this call, you're going to get an email that has clips from this show and that has action steps you can take. And one of them is to really support Casey Means for our next Surgeon General. So call Senator Susan Collins. She's at 202-224-2523. Call her and call her and call her. Get everybody you know to call her. And then call Senator Lisa Murkowski at 202-224-6665. This is critical. We need to get the right people in there, people who are really going to fight for the American people. And, Casey Means is one of those people. So it's a big part of the MAHA movement. It's going to be a real help to Bobby to have somebody like her there. So please follow up. And then, go to our website, take action on the MAHA bills in state after state. We're trying to get involved at the state level all around the country. Join our Substack, the MAHA Report. So important. Read the articles. There's so much good information there, just day after day. And then join us next week for a special gathering and episode, featuring the Disinformation Dozen, to really show all of you where we've come from. So this is a group of leaders, of activists who played a key role in sharing real information during the COVID years, who advocated for truth and transparency and real science, and were taken down by captured government agencies, and they really suffered. For all the work they did, for all the risk they took, they suffered widespread censorship on social media platforms. Many of them lost their businesses. It was really, really tough. But these are fighters, and we want to honor them and reflect on how far we've come in the last 5 years and how much better off we are and how much more able we are to tell the truth. And that's a lot of what the MAHA movement is all about. It's about telling the truth. It's about, transparency. It's about gold standard science. So we hope to see you next week, and let's all keep working, keep fighting together as a team to make America healthy. Thanks so much.
America's children are sick, and moms have been betrayed. The time for empty promises, long past. Now is a time for action. MAHA is the most powerful force of collective action in generations. The grassroots power of moms and activists has created an army of health warriors with more reach than all mainstream media combined. Together, we can end the chronic disease epidemic. MAHA's influence is reaching millions. It's reaching Congress. And that energy, these chain reactions, are working.
How about Operation Stork Speed?
Dozens of food companies removing toxic ingredients.
I plan to lead by example.
MAHA is now.
We're talking about how to change the culture.
The American people want America healthy again.
There's a renaissance moment in health in America.
For health, freedom, and the truth. Join us at MAHA Action.